Sweet peppers are one of those heat-loving crops that are fairly difficult to grow well here in Ireland, or at least I didn't used to have great success growing them, even in the polytunnel. They seem to require more heat during the growing season than most other crops that I grow, even more than tomatoes. And it has taken me a while to figure out how to manage them so that they remain healthy and productive. But this past season we were able to produce a lot of sweet peppers in one of my larger polytunnels, enough to make this a viable crop at a significant scale. Like a lot of things, this success is due to a lot of little improvements, but I think it's mainly because we are growing better varieties and keeping the plants adequately pruned. In the past, I didn't sow these long-season heat-loving plants early enough in the season, and it wasn't until the autumn that they started to produce something worth harvesting. This led to a short harvest period and a low yield, and it wasn't warm enough to really ripen the fruit, even in the sheltered microclimate of the polytunnel. I also used to let a lot of the side shoots grow, which allowed the plant to grow more of a bush form, which made it more difficult to support. They also became a lot more crowded, which allowed more mildews and rotting to develop, with poor airflow and lack of sunlight in the center of the plants. I tended to only do pruning later in the season, after everything became more crowded. And this lack of pruning earlier in the season probably encouraged the plants to focus on developing the leaves and stems, rather than focusing on the peppers which we wanted to eat. They tended to be problematic plants, producing only a small yield later in the season, and because I was only growing a few plants, they hardly seemed worth the effort, so I stopped growing them for a while. But for the past few years, I've been growing sweet peppers again, after doing some research into better ways of managing these plants, including sowing the seeds earlier in the season. The other main change was to prune the plants much more, leaving only 1 or 2 stems, and reducing the number of flowers that were left on the plants to develop. They have been more successful and productive plants in general, but I had mixed success with the range of different varieties that I grew in the polytunnel last year. One long open pollinated variety produced quite well, and one hybrid variety produced a lot of blockier bell peppers, but the other bell pepper varieties were less successful. This past season, I sowed pepper seeds in February, with more of a focus on bell pepper types, as I wanted to find varieties of this popular type of pepper that would be more successful in this context. I included a few different hybrid options and a common open pollinated variety of bell peppers, as well as a longer variety that had been more successful last year, and a few other types of peppers and chilies to explore more of the range of possibilities. The seedlings were potted up in mid-March, and I grew them with additional bottom heat from a soil warming cable. This is something that has really helped the tomatoes, aubergines, and other long-season crops that generally prefer warmer conditions than we tend to get here in Ireland in the spring. The pepper plants were finally transplanted into the side bed of one of the polytunnels at the end of April, spaced about 40 centimeters apart in a single row. As the plants grew, I removed most of the side growth, but kept one of the larger side shoots so that there would be 2 leaders or stems on each plant. Once the 2 leaders became well established on the pepper plants, they were tied up with twine to the support wire affixed to the polytunnel structure above. And I continued to wind up and occasionally clip these 2 stems as they grew. I have seen other people grow pepper plants with 2 leaders, and it seems to be a successful method. And perhaps it is better than the effort of propagating twice as many plants, but I'm still not convinced it's the best method in this context. One issue that I did notice with this method is that the peppers developing lower on the plant often became quite crowded. And a few peppers ended up being stuck in the middle between the 2 stems, restricting their growth and making them more difficult to harvest. It took me a while to figure out a good technique for pinching out the secondary shoots at the top of the 2 stems. I tried to pinch off just the growing tip of the secondary shoot, as well as all of the extra immature flower buds, leaving only 1 flower at each main node of the stem. I also tried to keep some of the additional leaves at the base of the shoot that I removed, thinking that these extra leaves would lead to more photosynthesis without necessarily leading to additional vegetative growth, which I thought would be a good thing. But trying to keep these extra leaves made the regular tasks of pruning a little bit more difficult and slower, especially when I was trying to remove them when they were much smaller, and I'm not sure if it was worth the effort of keeping these leaves. This pruning, like weeding, is another task that is so much easier and quicker if done regularly and consistently. And I think this pruning is probably better done at least once a week during the warmer part of the growing season to remove this extra growth when it is still small. I think this also improves the productivity of the plants, as it encourages them to focus on developing the fruit rather than growing more leaves. And they are not using nutrients, energy, and water to grow parts of plants that I end up removing. This regular pruning changed the shape of the plants, encouraging them to grow much taller, and the peppers were generally easier to harvest, especially compared to the bush plants that I used to grow. There also seemed to be less rot in the fruit compared to previous years, though there were still some issues, especially later in the season, and this is something that I want to work on next year. And this year, the yields were better, closer to what I would have expected. The long red Marconi variety, which I've begun to really like, produced a bit better than the previous year, with about 2 kilograms harvested from each plant. The Californian Wonder, which is a very common open pollinated variety, did a lot better as well. And I suspect that better fertility of the more developed soil, better water management, and better pruning really helped. There might have been better weather overall this year, though I'm not sure, but 1.6 kilograms of bell peppers from each plant was a lot better than last year. But this is still only 3 or 4 peppers produced on each plant, which is not a lot, even if they are quite big. The 3 hybrid varieties did even better, with the Red Star variety producing 2.2 kilograms of peppers per plant on average over a long season, more than any other variety. Each of these plants produced 9 or 10 good quality, well-shaped fruit weighing about 250 grams each. And later in the season there were still a few green peppers left on the plants that had not grown to full size, but they were still a harvestable crop. One other open pollinated variety that we tried was a more unusual type, producing many more smaller fruit. These plants did produce a smaller overall yield in terms of kilograms per plant, but the smaller fruit are perhaps more useful for some uses in the kitchen. Both the Red Star hybrid and the Marconi open pollinated varieties produced the most out of this small trial, and I like the taste of both and the difference between them. And these varieties both started producing earlier than the others, with the first ripe peppers ready for harvesting at the beginning of August. The peppers of some of the other varieties didn't really turn red until almost 3 weeks later. So if I was to only grow 2 varieties of sweet red peppers, I would grow the Red Star and Marconi varieties. They were both early, relatively high yielding, with good quality fruit, and enough difference between them to be worth growing both. Though the Marconi variety seemed to have more rotting fruit and struggled more than the other varieties later in the season. The Marconi is an open pollinated variety and the seeds are really cheap to buy, but there's almost too many in a pack to be able to use before the seeds got too old and the germination rate dropped too low. I can also save my own seeds if I take the reasonable precautions to not let the flowers cross-pollinate with any other variety. The hybrid Red Star variety has much more expensive seeds, and this is the same with the other hybrids, with some costing even more, depending on where I bought them from and how many seeds I bought. But if I can consistently get an extra 600 grams or a couple of extra peppers from each plant compared to an open pollinated variety, and start harvesting earlier, then it's probably worth the extra cost, even if it is 15 cents for each seed. I can see why it makes sense for commercial growers to grow hybrid varieties like this, and I think it makes more sense in this climate. I finally feel like I'm getting a good crop of peppers, with most of the larger varieties producing quite well. And getting a yield between 5 and 7 kilograms per square meter is pretty good, and definitely worth the effort with such a high value crop like this. Especially when some of the plants were producing 7 or 8 ripe red fruits in August and September, with a few extra green and smaller ones at the end of the season. It is still, unfortunately, a fairly short season, especially as I had to manage the plants for about 9 months, but I do appreciate it as a crop. I also grew a few other types of peppers, including one that had been bred for making paprika, with lots of smaller, bright red fruit with thinner flesh. I managed these plants with the same type of pruning, which produced a lot of peppers, which I dried and ground and made a lot of my own paprika, which is a fantastic addition to the kitchen. I grew a few plants of 2 different types of chili peppers, which seemed to be an easier crop to grow than the sweet pepper plants in this climate. Even 1 or 2 plants can provide enough for a whole year, depending of course on how many chili peppers we like to use. I left these plants to grow as more of a bush without pruning very much, as I'm not quite sure the best method for growing this type of crop. And I didn't get into the routine of harvesting regularly to get the most out of these chili pepper plants. Overall, it was a good year for peppers, and I was pleased that I was able to keep up with managing these plants for most of the season. And we harvested a lot of good quality peppers, though there were still some issues with blemishes and rotting, things that would be good to try to prevent, but not enough to really impact the crop that much. Next year, I might try growing single stem pepper plants again, especially if growing them in this taller polytunnel, as I think that would be easier to manage and I wouldn't have to deal with peppers stuck in between the two stems. I think I still need to do some work to find a balance between the number of stems that are left to grow, the spacing between the plants, and trying to get a higher yield, but also allowing enough sunlight and airflow into the center of the plants to reduce the impact of mildews and molds. I have heard that it can be beneficial to remove the first few flowers from the pepper plants to encourage the plants to become more established before focusing on producing fruit. This would lead to a slightly later crop, but apparently a bigger crop overall. But I want to see if this is something that is useful to do in a cool climate like this where the harvest season is already short enough. The other option is to overwinter the plants, to heavily prune them, then dig them up and transplant them into pots so that they can overwinter somewhere warmer and drier. I tried this last year with a few pepper plants, but all of the plants died over winter, and it's probably too late to try again this year. But this is something that I want to properly explore, to take advantage of the perennial nature of these plants, to get them established earlier in the spring so that they can get an earlier crop and hopefully a longer harvest of peppers. And to see if it's worth the extra effort compared to starting from seed even earlier in the year. This is all part of the continuing explorations into how to get more of a vegetable that I really like to eat in a climate that isn't really suitable for these heat-loving plants. I like making videos like this and to show my continual learning process in trying to grow more difficult crops, even though looking back at it, it all kind of seems fairly simple. But I think it's useful to make videos like this so that other people don't necessarily have to go through the same learning process. If you like this type of video and want to support the channel and my work and the further explorations in this Red Gardens project, please check out the links to my Patreon and PayPal accounts in the video description. But most importantly, thank you for watching.